Minnesotta Rokkr have officially announced their entire lineup coming into Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. That being Attach, Accuracy, MajorManiak, and Priestahh. Quickly before we hop into this, that roster as a 4 was never really something that came onto my radar as a real possibility here for Minnesota. I kind of gave a few predictions, things that I thought that could occur, players that may try to travel alongside each other, and I'm kind of surprised by this. Overall, the roster that we see here, to kind of give a little bit of perspective, Attach and Accuracy were released from the New York Subliners, while MajorManiak and Priestahh were released from the Atlanta phase. Now, to give a quick little update for those that maybe aren't aware, it was the Minnesota Rokkr who pretty much announced in bulk that they had released every single player from their team. So every substitute, which there were 2, and every starter, along, which was basically 5 in total, are all gone. So we talk about Silly, Asim, GodRX/Exceed, Alex, Assault, Tiny. All of them are gone. All of them are free agents, and at least as of right now, have yet to be announced on any team, which very well could change here in a matter of moments. But many, including myself, were in general very surprised to see a total restructuring of this roster, right? Considering at the start of this season how great they looked, they were looked upon as a team that was looking great in practice. They were a team that was looking super solid, a roster that not many people expected, a team and an organization in Minnesota Rokkr that wasn't familiar with Call of Duty esports. Really the only kind of main figurehead on this team really being Midnight to kind of head up this team. So there wasn't really a whole lot of identifiers in regards to this organization and in regards to the team that they specifically picked up. They were under the radar. Nobody really knew what to expect from this team. And if you were to give an up and under and say, oh yeah, if you're going 6, they were probably going to be below 6, around the 7-8 region based on a lot of people's predictions. And the way they started off the season was exactly the opposite, right? They started off looking fantastic, had numerous second place finishes, were constantly contesting some of the best teams in the world. They were the first team to beat the Atlanta phase, the first team to actually cause some problems, and what was looking like the very best team of the CDL to start the year. And then all of a sudden, they end out the season poorly. I mean, they were the biggest shock for me in terms of the way that a team started in comparison to the way that a team closed things out, right? They end the season out pretty bad, if not horrible, depending on the the verbiage that you like to use. They don't win a single series in their final 3 home series of the year, while also finishing top 10 at champs. And they didn't win a series of champs, by the way. They just had that because of their placement. So they pretty much don't win a single series for the final 4 events, the final one being champs, which goes to show that something should have been done, right? There's no question about that. Something had to be done with this team. I just think from all accounts, I was surprised that we didn't even see like one player stay on this roster, which was kind of odd for me. But I will say the main breaking point, I think, for the Minnesota Rokkr, the reason why we're seeing this massive restructure all began at the Dallas home series. And a lot of people instantly are like, wait, Dallas home series, what exactly happened all the way back then? It was the second grand final in a row that the Minnesota Rokkr had been a part of. And they're coming into a series versus the Florida Mutineers. This was Minnesota Rokkr's opportunity. Right, you got a lot of guys who've never won anything before, a lot of guys who are kind of in this moment where they're thinking, hey, now could be our chance, right? Our chance to finally prove everybody wrong, our chance to prove that this team, this roster, this franchise has what it takes to be a winning team. And they go into that grand final versus the Florida Mutineers as the absolute favorite. And after the first map, they get destroyed. I mean, they get stomped in the final 3 maps to close out the event. And for me at that moment, that was the breaking point for the team, where it was, all right, are we going to be Minnesota Rokkr for the future? Or is there a possibility that we could actually see some issues? And in the moment, no one really knew that this was the breaking point. But the team who had worked so hard to get to that point, who knew that they had the potential, that was the moment, for me at least, that said, this team can't do this anymore. And I think the players were under that same impression as well, because ever since that grand final, they have never been the same since. They have never been the same team that we saw in that moment. Player stats started to fluctuate. And that wasn't just because of online, because for those that remember, Dallas was an online event. They played well in that tournament. So again, I think it was for a number of different reasons that we do see this rebuild. And it is an interesting one, right? Kind of refocusing to the new team that they've got obviously presented. We talked about attach, accuracy, MajorManiak, and Priestahh. Now, interesting thing, you see these 4 guys on paper. I'm actually looking at it here on my monitor. It's an interesting group, right? Because you've basically got 4 players that all have an AR history. And for the very brief moment that I got to take a look at my timeline, a lot of people's questions were, okay, you get a lot of guys who run ARs. Who are the SMGs? I had a lot of people tweeting me, like, what are the roles going to look like for this team? Which I'll kind of give those in a moment. But just in general, right, you do have 2 flexes. You have 2 main ARs all kind of on the same team in terms of their roles to close out the prior season. And again, you also have 2 guys in your main ARs in terms of MajorManiak and accuracy who pretty much played the same role in terms of being a main AR focused kind of in-game leader, a guy who can really give a lot of great information throughout the map. They're both regarded as kind of like the Iceman. I know like TJ and a lot of guys have that title, but they were kind of regarded as that type of player for their team, scary in the clutch, right? And it's interesting for me that we would see MajorManiak and accuracy kind of on the same roster. Now, I do say that with the full awareness, and this needs to be presented, MajorManiak hasn't been in main AR his entire career. He actually likes the flex more. I believe he said that a few different times, and he's ran that throughout a majority of his career. So when we talk about a main AR position, when it comes down to this team in particular, it is not super surprising to see him be brought on as a flex, especially when we talk about 4v4 Call of Duty, which is what he ran back in World War II. So I think it's not as crazy as people think to see MajorManiak running a flex, but it is for me kind of surprising to see a player like MajorManiak and a player like accuracy, in fact, on the same team. So I don't think it's as crazy as people think, but I think that it is definitely very interesting. Now, I will say before we talk on the SMGs, I like this group, though. I really do. I like this team. I think this is a very well-structured group, but I do think that the meta definitely has the ability to affect this team in a major way, especially in regards to SMGs and how much those are going to be a factor. Now, when we talk about the SMGs for this team, which I believe are going to be attached and Priestahh. So in terms of the roles, this is what Landon thinks. This is what I believe. I'd be kind of surprised if we didn't see this kind of mashup. And again, it really does depend on what the meta is going to be for Cold War. But at least from an outside perspective looking in, I think we see accuracy run the main AR. I think we see MajorManiak run the flex, attached with the SMG, and the entry, if you want to call it that, basically the faster player of the 2 SMGs is most likely going to be Priestahh, more familiar with the role, attached, kind of more of a medium range, good SMG, obviously has some flexing history in his own regard. So in terms of the SMGs for this team, I think it's good, right? I think that you do have some good players here, but it's definitely a different look, right? And the reason why I say that isn't because I don't think that Attach and Priestahh can run the SMGs effectively, because I do think that. But you do have to bring up the fact that Attach looked excellent last season for New York as a flex, was great at kind of those medium range engagements from time to time, looked great with the SMG, don't get me wrong. But when you talk about a player like Priestahh as well, I mean, at least toward the end of the season, they were great for their respective teams, but Priestahh specifically was so good at whenever he kind of took over the Cellium role of being the flex for the Atlanta phase. So again, I don't discredit the SMGs that we have here, but it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, I think, for 3 out of the 4 players to kind of figure out what their roles are going to be. And again, a lot of it's going to depend, in my opinion, on the meta that we have for this game. I think a slower paced game works well for this team. I think this roster would really like that a lot. And it really just kind of depends on how we play 4v4. We haven't seen a Treyarch 4v4 game since Black Ops 3. That was Jetpack. You get my point, right? It's going to be a little bit of a different look. And one thing that I do want to say about the SMGs as well for this team, which again is what I believe, I'd be surprised if we saw MajorManiak. I would be shocked if we saw accuracy with an SMG. People do have to realize that Attach had a very sneakily great season for New York. And I will say I am very surprised to actually see him leaving the subliners. I didn't think that was going to be a thing, right? There's been a lot of rumors about players that could be brought in from New York. There's rumors about Clayster possibly going over to the subliners. I am surprised that we do not see Attach stay on New York because of the great season that he had. Again, they could have something else up their sleeves, maybe another flex that's kind of coming in. I don't really know, but I am surprised to see Attach leave this team But I am very impressed to see that the Rokkr obviously managed to grab him. Also very impressed to see that they managed to grab a guy in Priestahh. Again, you may look at Attach and Priestahh and think, well, you know, they had some better teammates. Mac was a story for the subliners along with Zuma. I mean, anybody but Priestahh was pretty much being talked about, it seemed like, from the Atlanta phase. Priestahh as well. I said this about Dashy. People have forgotten how great of a player that Priestahh is, because I know he didn't have the greatest of stats throughout the season, and I know a lot of people have said, well, forget the stats. You have to take those into consideration from time to time. However, when we talk about the player that Priestahh is, I've called him the Swiss Army knife of Call of Duty esports, because he can run anything, right? In one title, in Black Ops 4, he ran every single role. Main AR, flex, entry SMG. He did everything in one title and did very well, right, throughout the entirety of the game, considering the fact that he had to change. And at times you see players complain and say, oh, I had to run an AR or I have to run an SMG. This guy went from the slowest of ARs to the fastest of SMGs. And we know the difference between the ICR and the SOG back in Black Ops 4. So for me, I have always been under this assumption that Priestahh would be one of my first players to pick up if I was a franchise, because of the flexibility that you have with someone like him. So I would never doubt a player like Priestahh. I think it is going to be interesting to see him kind of play this super fast role, because I think I'd rather see him as a flex. But again, it's game dependent. I think if he starts off the year on a team like this, I think they have a good chance to kind of make things work. Also something to consider as well, I think this is going to be a very smart team. I'm excited to see this group, all the knowledge that they have great communication. I don't think we are going to see internal problems with this team. Obviously we talk about kind of the longevity of a roster that has the ability to maybe be changed up from time to time, but I think when you talk about a group together coming into a 4v4 COD, how much that can be reliant now on rotations and obviously in things like search and destroy. Strategy has obviously been talked about. Positioning kind of becomes more important rather than this flood heavy style. I think this team is going to succeed a lot when we talk about that position. So again, I've seen a lot of people kind of critique this team instantly and say, oh, too many ARs. But I think people are starting to forget that we've had 1 year of Modern Warfare. We were in 5v5. We're now going to a totally different game, of which the style is different, the pace is different, and a lot of these guys are actually playing different roles and have the ability to play different roles when we talk about this lineup. And I'll probably make a separate video about this, but I will say kind of quickly in closing, as I am excited to see this roster kind of debut, again, like the group that they have. I have to give some credit to the Minnesotta Rokkr brand, because again, coming into Modern Warfare, not a lot was known about this team. Not a whole lot was known about this organization. And now they have picked up 4 very, very well-known players. Attach has a very big brand himself. Priestahh as well has kind of started to grow that. It is very impressive to see in the 1 year span them kind of go from, again, this team of guys who they kind of pick up somewhat questionably. A lot of people aren't for sure in terms of like how certain players are going to work out. And so for them to kind of now be at the state where they are picking up a roster like this with the names that are on it, you have to give a lot of props to the Rokkr brand and the way that they have kind of handled franchising, especially in the short term. So massive congratulations, obviously, to the Minnesotta Rokkr. Excited to see this team work. Again, I think it's going to take some time before we can really establish a solid opinion on this group, but I'm not as surprised, I think, as a lot of other people are in terms of the roles and in terms of those things. So obviously more news to come, but again, Minnesotta Rokkr, interested to see these guys get to work.